So welcome Denver Seminary students, alumni, past, present, and even our prospective students. We're so glad you're here. My name is Lisa Curitan, and hi, Adrian. And I am absolutely delighted that you have chosen to join us for today's session. This is our final installment of our summer series that was curated just for you. This is for seminarians. So today we have a session with the great Dr. Ralph West, pastor of the Church Without Walls in Houston, Texas, and also now a professor at Baylor University. So we're excited to have him with us today. I'm not going to belabor you with lots of facts about him because I know that if you are here, you know who the great Dr. West is. So I'll simply say this. Dr. West is a visionary leader. He has over 20,000 members of his church. They're meeting in 3 locations with 6 services on a Sunday, pre-post COVID, not sure. But he was recently named one of the 12 most effective preachers in the English-speaking world, and that's according to Baylor University's George W. Truett Theological Seminary. He is eloquent, authentic, and a talented storyteller. And that is precisely why we're here, to glean from his ability to weave a story throughout the preached word. So in just a moment, we're going to let him get started, and he's going to just give us all he's got. And at the end of his session, we're going to be taking any questions that you have for Dr. West. So we're going to ask today, if you want to chat back and talk back and share with one another while he's talking and teaching us, feel free to use the chat box, but put your questions in the Q&A box. Then that way, Brenda and I will know exactly where to go look for your questions at the end of his session. So Brenda, our great DC tutor, is here. She's going to help me, and we'll take care of you all at the end of the session. But I know he cannot hear you, but let's welcome Dr. West. Dr. West, thank you so much.
Thank you. I can hear hands clapping.
Jazz hands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the invitation first. I feel like I'm part of the Denver theological community now, and to our illustrious president, Dr. Young, and then to John Jenkins for hosting the Washington, D.C. Community of faith, and to all our friends that are tuned in today. Lisa asked me some time ago if I would talk about preaching as storytelling or the weaving of story in biblical text. And I'm going to try to do that today. I'm not going to take any of the homileticians that write on story, Edmund Steimerly or Charles Neanderthal or Eugene Lowry or other people like that, and distill from their teachings. I want to speak to you as a practicing preacher, a pastor of a church, who crafts sermons weekly for my congregation, and to speak out of my practical pastoral work during the week. So I want to try to accomplish 2 or 3 things this afternoon. One is, for the first minutes, it might be 30 minutes, 35 minutes, I don't know, maybe shorter, depending on how the Holy Spirit works today. The first thing I want to do is take a passage of scripture and take a familiar passage of scripture, hopefully to most of us, and reshape that into a sermon. And then after we break for a few minutes, I want to return and then go through the sermon and talk about how I came about the way that the sermon was shaped. And then finally, after that, hopefully you'll have a series of questions that you might want to ask about the message, okay? So I'll get started after we have a word of prayer, and then open up this passage and go and work through it sermonically, and then we'll look at it homiletically, and hopefully some hermeneutical insight that we'll draw from how do you derive a sermon, or how do you stylize a sermon the way this is. Now, I don't hold my preaching up as an example or as an exemplar for you to follow. It is just out of my own working, and hopefully through my work, the Spirit will speak to you and awaken your imagination and your own creativity. And we'll see at the end what God has done or will do with you and with me during this time. So let's pray together. Students have gathered bi-coastally because of their love of your word and their desire to be prepared to do ministry in their churches through chaplaincy, in parachurch organizations, in small groups, and other. So help our time together to be one of refreshing, and then give us sanctified fun while we work, to remind people, as challenging as our ministries are, we learn how to do our work through real joy. This is what we ask in your Son, Jesus' name, and for his sake, we pray. Amen. Ezekiel 37, beginning at the first verse, reads, "The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' And I said, 'Sovereign Lord, you alone know.' Then he said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will become and come to life, and then you'll know that I am the Lord.' So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and the tendons and the flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, 'Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds and breathe into these slain that they may live.' So I prophesied as he had commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Hope down in death's valley. I don't think that it's a stretch to say that congregational life in church is strange. But strange times have always really been around us. Helmut Thielicke, who was a German theologian and a pastor of the Cathedral Church, recalled the day that he remembered the steeple on fire at the university and burning down the Cathedral Church. His home had already been bombed, and he no longer possessed the clergy attire that he typically wore to the congregation. And on that day, he put on what he had remaining, and walking in his army boots, as he describes it, and made his way down to the church holding the key to the door that no longer existed. When he climbed the steps stepped over the threshold into the nave, everything had been blown away. The walls, the framing, the roof, all gone, just shattered, embers, pieces of wood left alone. And then to his amazement, he looked and saw his congregation, not inside of the church, but standing on the periphery where the walls once existed. He had just remembered a few days before that where he had been talking to his congregation about God as a theologian. He wanted to take the high concepts of language and put it in pedestrian language, a parlance where all the people could understand what he was talking about when he talked about God. In fact, on that day, he recalled a woman who held only a hat in her hand and said, "This is the last piece of material that I have of my husband." He was blown away. But he died rejoicing because on Friday night when you preached, he and I sat and we listened to you as you talked about God. And he said that that's where his confidence had rested, in God. And this is all I have left of him. And as Tilica stood there in his strange congregation, a congregation that he had never witnessed before, living beings standing on the periphery, but standing in the burned ruins of his cathedral church, he sat there and understood something about what it means to really to put your confidence in the faithfulness of a living God. It was a strange congregation. You and I don't have to stretch our imagination to comprehend at least some of how he felt, because times like these have left us in strange congregations. Congregations that used to bustle over with people full of laughter and excitement and joy, and the children running to their different little services, and youth making noise in the hallway, and people who hadn't seen each other for 7 days recommitting themselves to church relationship and fellowship. People gathering on the parking lots and walking into worship together, waiting to hear the robust rendering of the great music of the church and to hear the public reading of scriptures and the prayers to be prayed. And now, cathedrals are empty, chapels with nobody in them, preachers preaching from pulpits to empty pews, hoping that they come across clear on iPads and iPhones and screens, sermons posted on Instagram and Facebook. You take those images and you trace church history, and I think that the right word to label those congregation or these congregations as is to say, these are strange times and a very bizarre, strange congregation. But as strange as our congregations look, none was as strange as the prophet Ezekiel, who started off, by the way, as a priest. And then God changed his vocational direction to a prophet. He had encountered God on multiple occasions. In his writings, really his first vision is in a storm where he gets a glimpse of God and he sees the faces of creation, of man and eagle and ox and lion. And it speaks not only of God's creation, but how God sees the world. In a July summer storm, he had another vision, probably the most famous vision other than the vision that you and I have read, is the day that he saw God mounted on a throne in a chariot with wheels intersecting like a gyroscope that moved him effortlessly around and revealing that God was everywhere and that God was all powerful. Those of us who've studied theology, we've been given words for that kind of description, that God is all powerful, God is all knowing, God is everywhere. He had other experiences of God where he had to bind his wrist. And one time he was a barber shaving half of his beard. And another time he crawled through a wall as a symbol of exiles being sent over to Babylon, carrying his little duffel bag with his refugee clothes packed neatly inside of it. But this time, Ezekiel has been given a vision of a valley. And the valley at ground floor of his sanctuary was scattered not with living, breathing, active people, but dried, dead, desiccated, disconnected bones. And he had an idea exactly what God had been showing him, not just in the previous visions, but in this vision. And he looked at his life and he knew at that time that God had given him a particular ministry that he would have to work with, and it would be a ministry of interpretation. That he would have to look at this vision and then make sense out of it, and then proclaim that vision, and then promote that vision and do something about it. You know, a lesson that you and I can learn as we stand with this prophet looking at this vision, as he sees hopelessness scattered on the ground floor of this strange sanctuary, is that we might want to do like Ezekiel and not do certain things. I mean, you consider what he didn't do. In our human endeavor, we're always trying to fix things. Most men, we're just mechanical that way. We just want to fix things. Human beings, period, just want to fix things. But notice what he didn't do. I mean, he looks out on this congregation. And normally when you're called to a church, the first days of your being called and installed, they call that the honeymoon season. That's when everything's going well. They say this is where the new broom sweeps clean. This is typically the time where whatever you want to get done, you can get done if you're going to get it done. And yet he starts his pastoral ministry down in Death Valley in the negative. I mean, bones. And he didn't sit down and call a committee together and said, I think that I want to launch my ministry by, let's count the bones. Let's make a calculation of how many bones we have. And while we're doing that, call an anthropologist in to see if we can trace the DNA of the bones. And while they're doing that and getting the history and the geography and the culture of these bones and their ancestry, maybe what we want to do is write a dissertation about this bone. Let's put together a doctoral project and let's separate the bones. Let's put short bones here and long bones there and tall bones here. In fact, maybe we want to put children bone, youth bone, young adult bone, women bone, men's bone. Maybe that's how we'll go about doing this project. He didn't do any of that. He didn't come in and say, well, while we're working through this maze of bones, maybe what we'll do is try to match the bones to each other. Let's just see if we can connect these bones. There are things that he could have done that he didn't do. But one thing that he did know about what he saw, that this was no just strange valley. He knew about how bones typically in a battle, that the dead would be left on the ground floor of the battlefield for passerbyers to see their defeat. He knew about that. But he also knew that this vision was more than that. It was a picture of the generation that he lived in. Initially, he thought back and looked in the rearview mirror and retraced Jerusalem and the temple and reading from the Torah and reflecting upon worship. And then remembering how Nebuchadnezzar would come in and cart the Israelites from Palestine over into Babylon, and how they would be situated by, as he was, the river of Chebar, and others would be lined up around the Mediterranean, and they would be taken away, put in a foreign land, and they would be moved away from their native language, and they wouldn't worship the God that they had known. Yahweh had been displaced as far as they were concerned. And he knew that the result of godlessness and moved away from a central place of worship, it was like people being dead and dry, desiccated with no hope and no life. He knew that this was not just a vision of a valley. This was a valley of bones that represented the condition of Israel. But you and I, we don't live in Israel now. We live in America, and we know something about dried bones, dead, desiccated, dislocated bones. We know something about lives that have been dried out from all hopeful possibilities. We know something about being disconnected and disenfranchised and marginalized. We know something about inequity and injustice. And you don't have to look far, by the way, just as recent as yesterday, to see another human life gunned down by the very people that are supposed to protect us. And for many of us that don't want to say that we have a race problem, vigilanteism still parades in our urban streets. Well, you get the picture. You can go on and talk about economics and military and politics and religion even, as you hear certain people from certain quarters close their eyes, like the prophets in Ezekiel's day, who saw injustice and put blindfolds on. But let's do something. Let's do what Ezekiel did. Let's not try to solve it on our own. Let's find out how you can bring life out of these dead situations. Well, in the middle of this, while he's being ushered around, escorted around what he sees, a question comes to him: Son of man, can these bones live? And that might be the most profound question that you and I, in the work that you do and I do, and the work that you're preparing for, and the work that I have been prepared to do, have to answer, Lord, I don't know. But can these bones live? I mean, you have the written record, so we could immediately respond and say, yes, they can live. But if that's the case, then why are so many people still dry and dead and hopeless and lost? Son of man, can these bones live? Lord, thou knowest. That might be the place where we begin, isn't it? I mean, I had mentioned some of the experiences that Ezekiel had had, so he knew that there were things that God could do. He knew that. He's not shying away from his prophetic responsibility. He's not doing that. He's just putting it now in the hands of the one who can make a difference. Lord, thou knowest. And at that moment, we're given some help on how it might be done. Here's what I want you to do. Preach the word. Preach the word in season, preach the word out of season, preach the word. And yet this text is tailored to say something to us, that hopelessness does not respond to word only. Ezekiel did just what he was instructed to do. He preached the word. He opened his mouth and proclaimed, and he preached the word. And when he preached it, it was a noise at ground zero of Death Valley. In fact, not only was it noise, but there was some moving around. And that's always a good sign that when you can preach, there's some movement taking place. And this is the result of the preaching. But they were still dead. I'm quite sure if we would assign certain words to what Ezekiel did, you and I wouldn't be out of bounds. I've seen and heard sermons like that. They are homiletically structured. That is, they have been furnished with all of the equipment that you learn in a preaching class. They have a big idea, and they have movements, and they have illustrations and applications. They've done exegesis. They've done it all. And there's this great proclamation. And at the end, there's been movement, but there's been no life. Now, I'm not criticizing preparation. I live on that street of preparation myself. But I am saying that there's something else to preaching. And so hopelessness doesn't respond just to word only, to a neatly packaged sermon. Stylized, invented, created, imaginative, alone. Mother Thatcher is not my story, but I came across it. Grandma Thatcher belonged to her local church that she had been a member of for many years now. And she was facing some uncertainties as she was preparing to go visit her medical practitioner. And so that Sunday, she was eager to get to church, and only thing that was on her conscience is there a word from God. And unfortunately, like every Sunday, she was sent away from her home from the malediction pronounced on her by her husband. Why don't you just move down there at the church? Just stay at the church. And so when she arrived, she took her familiar seat on the right side of the church chapel, on the side of the piano, with her big, large print Bible open. And she only had one prayer: Lord, speak to me today. Pastor Bowen made his way to the pulpit, and he was quite excited to preach sermon number 22 from his series from the book of Genesis entitled The Beginning of the Beginnings. And he was rather impressed with the outline that he had worked out on this particular Sunday as he would talk about Noah. And he read the scripture from Genesis 9. And he began with his outline: creation presented, capital punishment, covenant proclaimed, consequences performed, compassion personalized. And people wrote their copious notes of the sermon outline of Pastor Bowen, and Grandma Thatcher was just at that moment turned off and started reflecting over a psalm that she had been reading from the previous week. And the pastor marched on with his full of Bible, nice alliterated outline, and she said, last week it was all S's, this week is all CP's. And she was just kind of empty and dry, left there. Well, at that moment, something else happened. And that is, at that point, what happened is that she prayed, and the next Sundays she came to church, and there was a visiting preacher that was there, a missionary who had done his work in South America. And she said, Lord, is that word? And accidentally, maybe providentially, I don't know, he opened up to Genesis chapter 9, read the same passages, but his sermon was a little different. Reverend Bowen had announced his text and called it, God Speaks to Noah. But this Sunday morning, when the visiting preacher stood up and spoke, he asked this question: have you ever seen a rainbow? And in it, he began to talk about storms, and storms come suddenly, and storms come personally. And storms, they come and they break in on you, and they are uninvited. Everybody knows something about storms. And then he said, but have you ever seen a storm? And have you met the people in the Bible who encountered storms? He said, what about Noah, who saw a rainbow after the storm? And Ezekiel, who saw a rainbow in the midst of the storm? And John, who saw a storm, a rainbow before the storm? She wanted to know one thing: what was the difference between the two? I mean, the pastor had a neat outline, alliterated and beautiful, but here, this preacher, he just talked about storms and rainbow, but her imagination was fed. It was because you and I have been created a particular way that the hopelessness in our life doesn't respond just to words only. Children teach us that lesson. I have a grandson, and we have these children books, the same old books by Frank Crump that I used to read to my children. I'm reading to him now. And it's amazing. This boy knows these stories like my children did, and he still wants to hear the story. Initially, I would just stop that and I said, what is it about these stories that he keeps wanting to hear? It's the imagination. It's not just the words. It's the images. It's the metaphors. And Ezekiel seems to be what Augustine talks about, a master of metaphors. He uses them in a particular way, of what Sally McFay makes the statement she says about image and concept, that images feed concepts, but concepts disciplines image. So you and I have been created in a particular way that we don't just respond to word only. Those bones, they moved, they made noise, they may have even been rearranged, but they were not alive. Because hopelessness doesn't respond just to word only, not just to word. In fact, Jesus was a master of metaphors, and he knew how to tell a story. Now, I'm not in any way implying that story is the only way to preach, but the Bible is a big story, and it might be good sometimes to live in that story and let that story arrest our imagination. But that's not all that was said to Zeke that day. Then the word of the Lord came back to Ezekiel and said, Son of man, preach to the wind. You preach to the bones, now preach to the wind. And here's something that's startling about that. Hopelessness doesn't respond to spirit only. Today we live in a time where you hear this phrase constantly used, where people say, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. I hope if you have said that, after the day you never say that again. Religion is a beautiful word. I don't know the definitions that have been described to religion lately, but out of the Latin, religion means to be bound. You're bound to something. We're bound to a belief, you see. One of the beliefs that we're bound to is that the faith that we exercise is a content religion. It is a content faith. We don't just worship God. We worship God in spirit, yes, but also in truth, yes. And so hopelessness doesn't respond just to spirit. We have content in it. Martin Luther King Jr. in his sermon, A Knock at Midnight, described, he said, two kinds of churches. He said one church freezes up and the other church burns up. The church that freezes up, he said, now this is the church where the pastor preaches an essay. This is the church where the choir sings anthems. And this is a church where people sing choruls, but they stay away from spirituals and gospel. And today we would say worship songs or praise songs. They stay away from that because they don't want anything to indicate who they are, where they come from. He said that's a church that freezes up. And some of us know things about churches that freeze up. They're so cold that you can ice skate them even in the summertime. But then Martin Luther King Jr. said that there's the church that burns up. Now this is the one where there's more, he says, religion in our hands and feet than in our hearts and soul, that there's more in our muscleality than our spirituality. This is the one where when the preacher finished preaching, the people say, he sure did preach today. And people ask, say, well, what did he preach about? I say, I don't know, but he sure did preach today. Some of us know something about both those churches. The one that burns up and the one that freezes up. Spirit. Now, I'm not downplaying spirit. James Forbes in his Lyman Beecher lectures writes great lectures on the Holy Spirit in preaching. In fact, the whole thesis of his lectures rests on these words, that spirit-led preaching, anointed preaching, is preaching that brings dead bones back to life. And I believe that. I want to be where I can have spirit in preaching. I know it has a place because when Jesus preached his first sermon, he had gone back home to Capernaum, and this was going to be his day that he would debut his sermon. And he recited the prophet and said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he hath anointed me to preach the gospel. Not much preaching with power takes place absent the Holy Spirit. That might be a prayer that all of us need to pray. Lord, anoint me afresh to preach your word. I don't typically like to tell people what I pray, but somebody commented to me, or they said this back to me, my own prayer. I was preparing to preach and I just prayed and I meant it. I didn't think the person would take my prayer and go tell people. But he went and he just simply said, man, you would not believe the prayer that Ralph West just prayed while we were getting ready to go in church. He said, he prayed, Lord, I can't preach. I don't know how to preach. And I don't want to rest on last week or what people have said about my preaching. I can't preach. I've already failed if I don't have you. And I mean that even now, talking to you across this screen. I can't do what I'm doing now if the Holy Spirit doesn't take these few minutes and birth in me what needs to be birthed. I can't do it. And so one of the things that we can pray in ministry is to ask God to anoint us afresh and anew. It's like the hymn, "Great is thy faithfulness," that the Lord's mercies, Jeremiah says, is new every morning. Yesterday's bread doesn't work for today. Yesterday's birth of spirit doesn't work for today. We need today a fresh anointing for God to give us the power for bones to get up. But notice what happened now. Hopelessness does not respond to word only. And hopelessness does not respond to the spirit only. But when word and spirit, when they come together, something amazing happens. When Ezekiel proclaimed the word and the spirit, when spirit breathed on word and word got involved in spirit, that was not just a noise. That was not just a coming together. That was not just flesh that covered the bones, but the spirit breathed inside those dead, dried, now connected, hopeless, forgotten, they thought, body, and they stood up like an army. I thought of all the images that could be used, Ezekiel would select that of an army. Now, I'm not a military man. My service of military extends of one semester in ROTC, a semester that was just the worst semester on the planet for me. I needed one credit. I couldn't get in gym, so I had to opt out for ROTC, or I couldn't be enrolled. I had to carry my 15 hours. And it was terrible. At least that's the way it started out. The problem that I had was that Lucius Wagner was the sergeant. Lucius and I went to the same church in college. I knew his dad. And so I thought my familiarity should give me a kind of special place with him. But when he was uniformed, he was a different kind of person, and he expected me to function a different way also. And so that it just went downhill. Until one day, Sergeant Ross came to me and he stood toe to toe. He barked out some things to me. He really got my attention. And from that day on, I became the best soldier in the ROTC. I learned how to run the cadence, and I would be on the drills, and I knew how to stand erect and what salute to make and what side to stand on when an officer was coming and how to greet. And I noticed how not only we were in unity, but uniformity. And it worked that way when everything was regimented. That's what happened that day. It was a picture that I will raise you, and I will not just give you unity of life, but uniformity of being. And they were alive. Word and spirit coming together, amazing things began to happen. It always been that way. Throughout all the scriptures, word and spirit coming together. Moses at the mouth of the Red Sea. Stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, and he extends the rod. Word, and then spirit breathes, and now Israel marches over into new territory. Word and spirit coming together. Always happens that way. In the birth even of our Lord, word comes to Mary, spirit breathes on her, new life comes from her, word and spirit. Elizabeth, word of promise, and then spirit leaps in her womb with John, and word and spirit comes together. Even on resurrection morning, when we recite the great confession of the church, I believe in God, the creator. I believe in Jesus Christ, his son, born of a virgin, suffered under Pontius Pilate, crucified, buried, and God raised him, word and spirit coming together. I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the one church. I believe in that. Word and spirit come together and amazing things happen. And when word and spirit, that's what God has called us to do. Proclaim word, live that word, and rely upon the Holy Spirit. And we're the ones that God wants to use to make a difference in a valley filled with bones, of broken homes and broken dreams and broken government and broken policing and broken economy and broken health. God wants us not just to bring word, but spirit, because spirit reminds us that there's something supernatural that takes place. And it's out of that supernatural, that transcendent, that things begin to happen. Have you ever wondered, when you think of those lines, how important what happened down in Death Valley was that day? I mean, Babylon, one of the wonders of the world, now it's gone. Its hanging gardens, gone. Its double wide walls where two chariots could run next to each other, gone. Nebuchadnezzar, one of the grand generals of military and politics, gone. When the last time you heard a mother say, I'm going to name my child Nebuchadnezzar. I'm going to call him Neb. When the last time you heard a mother call her child Ezekiel? Something happens when word and spirit comes together. That's where hope is found. And you see, the whole image today of the vision down at Death Valley is that one word is where hope is to remind us of how hope, and that's what Israel was. They thought all hope was gone. They in Babylon, they thought it was all gone. And now down in Death Valley, just a thread of hope. Watts' painting of the woman sitting on the orb, scantily dressed, in a fetal position. I remember having to answer, what is that picture? And I said, despair. And Dr. Durkee said, that's a picture of hope. That's Watts' picture of hope. So where there's one thread, there's the symbol of hope. And hope is powerful. It's indispensable. It's indefatigable. It is a word that reminds us that it's not over. Things look hopeless around us. And just think, honestly, that God has entrusted you with a word of hope. Let me close now by saying this. One Sunday I had finished preaching, and I would come down from the pulpit and I would walk to the door, and I would shake hands to greet the people as they were leaving. Now, I'll never forget it. This lady came to me and she said, Reverend West, you hope me this morning. And I said, I'm glad I could help you today. She said, no, you hope me this morning. And so I thought that I would help her gently get her grammar straight. And I said, well, you know, Mother, I praise God for that. I'm just glad that I had something to say that could help you. She said, listen, if you had helped me, I would have told you. But you hoped me this morning. I went back to my office. I said, she's a better theologian than me. I was hung up on grammar and word and all that. I said, she knew a lot more about life and God than I did. I let my degrees and my credentials get in the way. That lady just hoped me. She just helped me by hoping me. Because on Sunday morning, in a pandemic and a protest and polluted politics and poverty, what people don't need, they don't need just help. They need hope. And that's why we proclaim, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Dr. West, I'm gonna try to get myself together
Lord, yeah.
over here, because you done hope me.
We need
Oh
hope.
my God, I'm over here trying to take my notes feverishly. Dr. West. Okay, so I'm just gonna flow for a second.
Yeah.
That was masterful. And I want you all to get your questions into the Q&A box so we can take advantage of this wisdom while we have it. It is precisely why I asked you what I asked you.
Yeah.
And so a group of us went to Denver to see Dr. West speak at the gala in February, and he also spoke at chapel. And what was so obvious to us is the way in which you weave the word so masterfully. And you did for us that day exactly what you just did. I typed in the chat box, Dr. West, it's as though Ezekiel was your boy.
Yeah.
Like Ronica and I were talking, I said, he talking about Ezekiel like that's his friend. And so, Dr. West, give us a bit more insight to that, right? Okay. I don't want to assume what that is. Okay. I want you to tell us what that is.
Good. That's a great question. One of the things, and a lot of this, and I would really encourage all of you over your time of study, is to become a life learner in terms of biographical material. And to sit down and do just what you said in the question, is to befriend the characters that you engage. I think it was Phillips Brooks that says that about biography, that it's not to be imitated, but it's to be inspiration. Is that we're not trying to imitate Ezekiel, but Ezekiel inspires us. And one of the ways it inspires us is we start asking Ezekiel questions like, you know, what about God telling you when your wife died not to mourn? How does that fit into your prophecy? And a line that you may want to remember about this is, if you talk to the Bible will talk back to you. But if you don't talk to the Bible won't talk to you. And I wish that I could say that I did that more. It has only been lately, over the span of years now, but still where I converse with the characters that way. That's one thing that I do, is to ask that. But then write this name down, Alexander White. Alexander White was a great preacher. And you can still get him probably on Google, on Amazon. I don't know if you can get hard copy, but I know you can get his digital work. He was a specialist in biographical preaching. Mm. Now, he writes on everybody. So I wouldn't recommend that you just try to sit down and read straight through him. But maybe as a resource, when you prepare to preach on somebody, to go to him and say, let me hear what Alexander White. Two things Alexander White was masterful with. One was his biographical ability to bring these Bible characters alive. But then secondly, his opening statement of biography is worth looking at and studying to help you open up sermons with an arresting moment. Normally, if I would have preached this under different circumstances, I probably, before I read the scripture, I probably would have opened with a statement like, what's the strangest congregation that you've ever witnessed? Something like that, I'll try to work it until people say, tell them, say, what's the strangest congregation? And then you sit down and say, I saw a man that built what is called a crazy church, made up of, 15 different pieces of this, and this. Tell them, say, now that's weird, but let me read to something, let me read something to you that might be stranger still than that. So, and that's just working with people because you're trying to get the audience to get on with you as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. But to the issue of getting to know the biblical character, that comes one through reading that person's life, and then read it like a child would read it. One of the things that we become so technical in our preaching that if we're not careful, we'll let our technicalities interfere with creativity. And so those who have that creativity now, don't lose that. Hold on to it. Which is why I normally tell people when you're working through a sermon and you have your text, before you pick up a commentary, before you just read it, and whatever thoughts come to your mind first, just start writing them down. They may be all over the place. And 90% of it you might not use, but it might awaken something in you to say, that I need to explore that, So biographical reading is one thing that really will enrich your preaching. And that's how you get to know these characters in a way where you say, that's his boy right there, Because you start having fun with Ezekiel. I mean, this guy has the strangest visions on the planet. And you follow him around, you said, poor Ezekiel. When we went in seminary, we used to say, it's irreverent, but we say, I think Ezekiel, man, is taking LSD or something, because the stuff that he saw. And yet, when you get through with it, you say all of it was to reveal God's transcendence, God's holiness, God's faithfulness, God's dependence. It's really a big theocentric book where you say, this is what God was revealing to him through these prophecies, these visions, and making him a symbol of his own purpose.
So I heard you say, obviously, for us to get this book by Alexander White, use it as a resource. The other thing I heard you say, just lightheartedly, but I think it's big, Dr. West, is I heard you say, don't lean on that on all of those resources that we have, going straight to the commentary. Like, let that commentary within you develop first. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would add for the preacher, the young preacher that's trying to develop their ability to glean from the text?
Yeah, that's good. My thing about commentary is that if you're not careful, you'll start suffering from the disease of commentariosis. You'll just depend upon that person.
Yes.
Say you're going to do Ezekiel 37. Mm-hmm. And you've done your best thinking on it. But let's say that you take away from that something about emphasis all on the bones, just the bones. And then you say, oh man, I got this great sermon. And what I did when I was writing that sermon, and of course I had read and preached Ezekiel before, and I said, let me read this again. And so I started listening to a series of sermons on Ezekiel 37, and all of them were bad. They were just bad. Either they were too historical in the sense that they're trying to describe everything that happened in exile, what Ezekiel, what Nebuchadnezzar was, what Babylon, and it just got weighty. Or it was too flippant. Everything was trying to hurry to get the bones and the leg bones and the knee bones and the foot bones. So I read mine, I had written mine out before I started listening because I didn't want to get thrown off. And I listened to what people call, oh, this guy, he's an expositor, oh, this guy, all that kind of stuff. And I pulled up Clarence LaVon Franklin, C.L. Franklin's sermon on dry bones in the valley. That's Aretha Franklin's dad. And he was not a man who was formally trained, but he had three people in his life. One was one was a pastor preacher, but two of them were scholars. And but I know two of them were bona fide scholars, and then the other one was an educated pastor. But what he did, he met every week with these men. They became his seminary. And the sermon that he wrote on dry bones, my goodness. And I said, that's what happens when you don't let technicality get in the way of creativity. You get a chance to hear it. Dry bones in the valley. It's like, my goodness. And I told a friend of mine last night, I said, we've done C.L. Franklin a disservice by fast forwarding his sermons to his close. I said, man, this man's content and delivery. And you got to think, when you hear his sermon, he preached this back in the 50s and preached himself literally out of the fields, literally, And then so much you could talk about Franklin, his major influence on civil rights movement, the Big Poor Man March in Detroit, Michigan. He was the one that really put that on and hosted, but that creativity. So those that are listening, you just say, I'm going to sit down and listen to C.L. Franklin, because I said, we have done him a grave disservice. You're talking about the beauty of preaching, the beauty of preaching. So that's what I mean by that, And then once you write out your outline or your thoughts, that's when you want to go to the commentary to ask yourself one or two things. I want to make sure that I'm not violating the text. That's what I want to make sure. And so I always recommend that you get a few commentaries. I don't know which ones to get, because I don't buy series. I buy commentaries based off of need. So those of you that are listening and you said, I'm going to do a series out of Ezekiel, then I would say, go to the people at Denver who teach scripture and say, what are the three commentaries that you would recommend I use? Okay. Heavyweight, middleweight, lightweight, which one would you say this is your heavyweight? That's the one that does, I always say 1 inch above the text. Every word, every thought, every clause, every phrase, language, and then middleweight. That's the one that looks more at the pericope of the passage. They look at blocks of it. And then the lightweight, that's more devotional material. That will probably help you just devotionally when you're looking at it. Okay. So one's not better than the other. It's just the weight, that the vision that they're in, Okay. And so when you look at that, and then here's the key, not to write what they wrote, but to ruminate over what they wrote, and then to take the thought, put it in your words, and then work from that. So if you're trying to, you say, the temptation is, that's who they are. They're the best at the best at what they do, unless you're going to quote them. But other than that, you sit down and say, let me think about what they're saying. Yeah. Let me try to put that in my own words. And that's where you start flowing,
Yeah, what is it saying to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what is it saying to you, and what is it saying? Because what you don't want to do is side up. But some of the best preaching is when you have a thought on a text and it turned out to be the wrong one. And then you say, I'll give you one example. For years, growing up, I'd heard when the passage where Jesus says that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. And so there's this whole story of how the camel can kneel and go through the keyhole of the gates. And I preached that, and I heard a guy not long ago preach that. And I was telling my sons, I said, that's not what Jesus meant. Jesus meant simply this, what he said. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a woman's sewing needle,
Mm-hmm.
or a tailor's sewing needle, than it is for a rich man to get in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
If the camel can go through there and say, well, he's saying, no, camel can't go through that, and you can't get in. And the point was not that you were rich,
Yes.
but you let your riches keep you away from the kingdom.
Yeah.
Made you think that you were somebody that you're not. And so the way when I preached, I said for many years when I preached this, I always said this. Tim said, but as I read this, that's exactly what Jesus was not saying. He was saying, I didn't say that there's a probability of you going in there. I said you cannot enter carrying that with you. You got to unload that. I made you rich for a reason, that you empower other people along the way, so yeah, things like, so a lot of times, when you get to these great passages, here's another one, when you talk about interpretation, the parable that Jesus tells about the friend at midnight, and he's beating down the door, and the man finally gets up and he says, because of your importunity, that King James used, the word, because of your persistence, I got up. And Jesus was saying, that's exactly how God is not. God's not like some tyrant that you just beat your knuckles raw to get his attention. You are his child. What child with a loving parent has to beat their knuckles till they bleed to get his attention? And that's why he came back. He said, so I say to you, he says, when he go in there, he says, what father having a egg would give a scorpion to his son, or a fish and give a snake? He says, so will your father give the Holy Spirit. What he was getting to, he says, I'm not that kind of tyrannical God. I'm not to be confused with Zeus and the Titans and the Olympians. I'm a loving father.
Yes.
Passionate. Slow to anger, abounding in love and mercy. You ask, and that's when he said, ask and it shall be given. Seek and knock. He said, oh, you don't go in there talking about, oh Lord, I got to go to God again. He said, no, I want you to lovingly come to me. Ask me and I'll give it, And those become those nuances where the light comes on, because I said to my church when I preached that, it's been many years now, and it was John Claypool gave me the insight of that by looking at it in the Greek, and it was like, no, God is the opposite of that. He's not some tyrant that you got to plead and beg, oh God, please. He said, no, I'm a loving father. I want you to ask me. And when you ask, I'll answer. And when you seek, you'll find. And when you knock, I'll open the door.
I'll open the door. Dr. West, I want to get back to these stories that you use. And obviously you're well read. But how else do these stories come into play for you?
Okay.
Because you weave them in and out so easily and eloquently. It's like a well inside of you where they just come from.
That's a great question. Reading is one. And for instance, the big idea of the Ezekiel 37 passage for me, the big idea was actually the closing statement. But the big idea of the whole sermon rested on one thing. When the word and spirit come together, amazing things happen. That's the whole idea. Everything else is dressing to get to that one point. When the word and spirit comes together, amazing things happen. So let's say I don't have any resources of story. Let's just say I don't have no resources of story. I don't know where to go get them, how to find them, or whatever. So as you begin reading through a passage, and in this case, you say, I have an outline. I got an outline. And my outline is simply this. Consider what Ezekiel did not do. Hopelessness does not respond to word only or alone, Hopelessness does not respond to spirit alone or only, but when word and spirit come together. So I got that. So it's like, but how do you make that live? And by the way, I wasn't trying to preach Ezekiel different to say I hadn't heard it that way or not. What I did was, out of my own exegesis, said, you know what, this is just a vision. The big issue is God has not abandoned his children in exile, and he will bring them back home. Okay, so all this is at work in your head. And so the purpose of the story or the illustration is one thing. How do I use story in a way to help people see what Ezekiel saw? Now, some stories are so good that if you're not careful, they can overshadow the entire sermon.
Right.
So in this sermon, I used a variety of stories intentionally for class. One is, you sit down and say, okay, I got it. This is a strange vision down in the valley. And I started playing with that, saying, okay, a strange congregation, hopelessness down in Death Valley. So, okay. So, and we'll talk about titles and all that later, but you asked one other question. How do you come up with this? I allow what I read to start making me think for the person that's in front of me to say, especially in this case, this is a familiar passage. Everybody is waiting on them dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. And so I want to tell the story. So the first thing that I see, let's start with the movements, what he didn't do. And I'm just having fun now, I'm just having fun. What didn't he do? And just think about that. If you're sitting around, what didn't he do? Oh, he didn't count the bones. He didn't measure the bones. He didn't separate the bones. He didn't categorize the bones. He didn't write a paper on the bone, project on the bones. He didn't call in bone specialists. He didn't sit down and say, what's the anatomical structure of the bone? So as long as you can talk about that, you can have fun with that. And then but what you're leading to in those statements, because those statements become illustrative themselves, you see? While you're just defining it, that becomes illustrative. That's almost kind of little vignettes or vignettes inside the story. Because the more you hear it, you say, wow, that's right. He didn't do that. You kind of chuckle at it, and the eyes said you laughing with it, And if somebody, if people get to it, it's up said, still say, this is thick bones, thin bones, tall bones, short bones, little bone, long bone. That's a young bone, old bone, Said now, but now you're leading up to something. Because what you want them to see is, these are not just bones. The more you describe them, you start leading to something. You say, I'm not talking about bones, he's talking about people. You see, he's talking about the very landscape of the world we live in. Man, this guy's talking about pandemics. He's talking about deaths. This guy's talking about incarceration rates. And I said, oh my, and that's why you say, oh my goodness, I'm thinking this. And now they really listening now and say, oh my goodness. And so, can these bones live? Right. Can these bones live?
Yeah.
I mean, uneducated, unlearned, immigrants. Can these bones live? So you slip away from talking about, laugh about the bones. You sit down and you segue and talk about, this is a picture of Israel. They caught it away. They've been slaughtered. They've been killed. The best, because one of the pictures that Ezekiel uses about the meat in the pot. And he says, the best meat has been uh, carted off. They left the leftovers behind, that kind of stuff, you know. Then he turns it around. The leftovers have been brought. The best meat has been killed off, all that kind of stuff, the pot. So then if you get history of scripture, now you move back into Washington, D.C., Denver, and you start talking about the condition. And people say, oh my goodness, this guy is not talking about it. This lady is not talking about the bone. They're talking about the human condition, you see. Yeah. And then the story of Grandma Thatcher, you know, the whole, you know, and I use a long, and that's kind of a recreated story that's kind of recreated. And the whole point is to show, you know, Pastor Dries Dust is more interested in his pretty outline. And here you have the visiting minister that says, I don't have a pretty outline. I just want to talk about storms that come to your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my goodness, you know. It's like, wow, what's the difference? Say, yeah, you were so worried about your alliteration. This guy was talking about your life. And then, you know, and then to use a piece of material from Martin Luther King, from one sermon. So the point is, in each one of them, you get a chance to see. For instance, you say the introduction was a biographical introduction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in movement, in the big movement, a first movement becomes a kind of description that becomes a kind of descriptive illustration of story. So you got biography of Helmut Tilliker and his experience. Then you have description. Then you have an invented story in the second movement about word only. Then you got a piece of sermonic history from a sermon that Martin Luther King Jr. is preaching. Of course, you got quotes from Sally McFay, you know, and then in the last one, you have a piece of biblical history, you know, just of an archaeology, and then your personal story, with two personal stories. One when I was in the ROTC, and then the one about the lady. And both those stories are very true. And who said that to me, you know, said, if you had helped me, I would have told you, you helped me. And she really was. She was more insightful than I was. And then the piece of him. So you get a chance to say that these illustrations come from everywhere. But say again, because I never answered what I started, say you don't have any of that at your resource. I'm gonna turn you on to a great research. This is my research assistant, and her name is Google. Because whatever you can think, Google got something about it.
Yes.
And the key to Google is if you can put the right question in, Google will give it back. Now you say, but yeah, I've come across that, but I don't know how to use that as an illustration. Well, you're not trying to tell everything.
Yes.
What you're doing is looking at the story and say, oh, this is a good part that I can use. You know, I can't tell all of it because I intentionally did the Grandma Thatcher piece long for a reason. It was intended to be long. It was intended to be a sermon in a sermon, you know. If I would tell the same story, but I would condense it if I was in a church setting, you know, because I would hurry up and get past it. You know, I would just kind of use different language to move on it. So when you find these illustrative materials, some of them are stories and some of them from history and biography, some from natural science, some of them from cartoons, you know, be open to everything, because what you're asking is one thing. How do I use this to help people see that? The goal of preaching is turning a person's ears into eyes for them to see what you're talking about. See?
Oh, that's good. Turning people's ears into eyes. That's very, very good. I want to turn a little bit of the mechanics, a little bit more of the mechanics. So you just added one piece, which is Google as your research assistant. Yeah. But we noticed something. A couple people noticed this. So, and I hope that you will share with us. Are you using manuscript and text right now while you were teaching us?
No.
So, okay, so, right. how you remember all of those stories. Like, what is your cadence that helped you? That was like 6 stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, the scripture, obviously you're weaving in and out of that, but do you have a process to help you track and maintain your story cadence so you remember what you're doing?
That's a great question, you know, because that's kind of a rhetorical format, and that's good that you're talking about that. How do I recall most of that? On one hand, I want to say I don't know. And then on the other hand, I think I do know. And now I need to figure out how to put it in words. One of the things that will help you remember story, to remember story, is when you read story, whether it be biblical story or a story that you want to tell in a sermon, is that number one, you have to own that story. It becomes your story. The reason why most people can't remember the story is that they're trying to remember it the way somebody else told it.
Mm.
It's the same process in commentary. And when you come across something, you say, this is what I need to say, but I need to, that's not my language, that's not my thought. How do I say it? And you meditate, you know, you reflect on it. And you want to keep working at it until it's clear. It's probably no longer than a paragraph anyway. And once you think yourself clear, you say, I can use that. Same thing with story. So you've heard the story of Helmut Tilliker and what's going on. Now, I could go in and talk about he was in Stuttgart. I could talk about, well, you know, he started in Bonn and then it was Heidelberg and Stuttgart. All that doesn't matter to that. All of that I'm trying to get to in that story. For people to know, Helmut Tilliker was a pastor and Helmut Tilliker was a professor. Helmut Tilliker's house was blown up and he also watched his church burn down.
Right.
All of his clergy attire was gone. All he had was his boots. And when he walked, and my favorite line of the story is, he held the key to the door that no longer existed. That's actually in his writings. But he walks across the threshold and he stands in the ruin and he sees his congregation. They're all on the outside. He's standing in the ruin left by the bomb. So some of what it is say, well, I need to tell that story. Because you can tell that same story. You can do it right now if you don't get word about whether you said it like I said it. So you say, well, what is the germ of the story?
Yeah.
It's simply this. His church got blowed up. It was gone. And when he went to church, everything was gone. So it's gone, gone, gone. And he saw his congregation standing outside and they wasn't in the seats. And if you can get that, you say, I can go with that story.
Yeah.
So the point of the story, say, what's the big idea of the story? You know, what is the story that you're trying to tell? I'm trying to tell that the church as he knew it was gone. So you say, tell that story again. You know, Helmut Tilliker was a German theologian and a polished preacher, an academic who taught systematic theology. He pastored in Stuttgart. During World War II, his church and home was bombed. And the day that he stood in his church, everything looked different. Walls, ceiling, gone. The only thing that remained was symbols of the church that used to be, but his congregation stood on the outside while he stood in the ruin. It's the same story.
Yeah.
Same story. So what you're trying to do when you own these stories to say, let me get the germ of it. Let me just get the story. And then you can weave around it, you know. You can get as clever with it as you want to, you know. Now, one thing that has helped me with story is that I've read a lot of novels. I'm fascinated with novels, with people that write novels, what they can do with language.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that they write novels, and a lot of these sentences are made up of 1 and 2 syllable words. And what their description is beautiful.
Yeah.
So preaching and becoming a better preacher and a better communicator is just a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's good work. And so for everybody that's listening and that say, how do you do that? Just know this, it's a lot of work. But it's work that you can do. It's doable work. You know, you can do it. And you work here the best way. Work a little at a time. So if you're working on outlining, you know, keep working on outline. Now that you got outlines, you got a feel of how outlines work, then you start working on, okay, I want to work on my movements of the sermon. That's what I call them. Sometimes people call them points of the sermon, you know, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4.
Okay.
You know, things like that. And everything is just working a little more and a little more and a little more, you know. It's an evolution. It's ongoing. You just keep working at it, you know. There are no experts at it.
So your development of your outline and your stories and your points are things that you've done, but when you go to stand up on Sunday morning, it's all living in you.
That's it. You embodied the sermon by this time. Imagine you're saying, I got a week to work on my sermon. And you say, I want to write it. And I still write my sermons out.
Okay.
And I write them for the purpose that I may have to preach it again, or I don't have to do the exegetical work again once I do Ezekiel 37. It's probably something somewhere. And for all of you to remember, all of the work that you're doing, you're actually building your corpus, your body of work, your body of theological and homiletical work. Because when you talk about God, you're doing theology.
Yeah.
So you're building your theology. So maybe once or twice a year, even if you don't want to do it, and this is the pot calling the kettle black, because I haven't done it in forever. But try to go back and read through some material. One of my weaknesses have been for years is like, you asked me to do this today, I would have felt like I needed to go write out a brand new outline all over again just to talk about what we're talking about. Versus saying, wait a minute, every week you have written out a lecture on preaching. Take one of the sermons that you have done and help people understand what you have done to get to what you've done. You know, so it's a lot of things like titles and titles as well as introductions and conclusions all matter. You know, that's a big thing. The different kinds of introductions that you can use, the different kinds of conclusions that you can use, how all of it fits together. You know, one of the things that helped me with movement of sermons is sometimes when I'm reading or working through something, I'll listen to John Coltrane's Love Supreme. One of my favorite pieces of church music is John Rutter's Requiem. And when I'm listening to it, and this helps me be fluid, is to say, look, they're not breaking in on what they're performing, telling you what they're doing. They just do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, so like when you listen to Coltrane's Love Supreme, you got, you know, it sounds like he's playing Love Supreme 4 times, the same thing, but each one varies maybe with some tone or movement in it. I'm not a musical person, I just like it. But I know one thing, it fits together. You know, he's not stopping saying, hitting the note and saying, now what I'm doing now is this. You'll figure out once you listen to it a few times, you say, oh yeah, Coltrane, Love Supreme. Oh, that's percussion or persuasion, whichever it was. Oh, no, that's the one that's doing the prayer. Oh, this the one that's the prelude. You know, you start picking it up after a while. Mm-hmm. With Rutter's Requiem, you listen to it and you say, man, this music is put together. Well, sermons become that. They become a piece of work that we're putting together. So when you're standing up to preach, work at it, and remember, in my 20 minutes, 30 minutes that I have, I want this to be set, set. I want it to set, and I want it to be creative, and I want it to flow right, and I want it to be meaningful. You don't do all the work that you're doing in seminary not to do that. You're doing it. You get a chance the times that you preach to say, my goal is to present right before the people that I'm going to preach to.
That's good. I think, Dr. West, I do have one question to go just a tad bit back to stories, and then I want to come back forward. You mentioned your ROTC story, and you mentioned your You Hope Me story. So one question that Ronica wanted to know is, how transparent are you with your stories? Where's the line? Do you have a line in terms of how transparent your stories are?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great question right there. A great question. For those of you that want to use autobiography in your preaching, there are certain things that you draw lines on. Like, you don't want to give away too much about your children, about your spouse. You never want them to be the brunt of the story. In both cases, it was true, but it's on me. I'm the one that didn't want to abide by the rules. And then another one, she taught me theology.
Yes.
Okay, people will let you get away with it. You don't want to be the hero in every one of your stories. You have people that sit down. They're always the hero. They always came out right. So that's one thing. Another thing is that you want to be very careful with medical advice or surgeries. You don't want to be grotesque in the sermon, that kind of stuff. You don't reveal your intimacies and things like that. So yeah, transparency need to be done with very clearly defined demarcations and say, this is a line that I do not cross. It's called confessional preaching. Confessional preaching. The problem with most people is, they cut their wrist and just bleed all over the pulpit, and you don't want to do that. And it's only used when it's going to really shed light on something that you're saying. Only that. And normally I won't use me as in the illustration, but if I come across something that I think that's worthy, then I'll use it.
That's good. That's really good. So you talked a little bit about, I want to go back to your discussion around how you listen to these sermons on Ezekiel 37 after you had developed your thinking. Yeah. And so Hunter has this question, and she says, what's the balance between gleaning from our favorite preachers versus developing our own voice, particularly as young seminarians? Help us with drawing that distinction.
That's again a great question. Initially, in your embryonic years of ministry, you're in search of your voice, and typically, every preacher has an acuity toward somebody. And it's normally a similarity. Initially, the first people we are attracted to, people that we like so much, we want to imitate them. And then after we move past wanting to imitate somebody, we find somebody to say, that person thinks the way that I want to think. Mm. So this person now becomes more like a distant mentor. And you're attracted to that person because you possess those qualities. You say, I have those qualities. This person now is helping you shape by listening to them, okay, those qualities. And then, again, in the beginning years, you normally would glean a lot from them. I mean, really glean from them. And sometimes you glean until what you glean become your own. You're not imitating it anymore. It is inspiring you. And now you're developing, that's how you begin to develop your own voice. Your own voice is starting to be heard out of that.
Yes. Is there any advice that you would give young communicators as we are? I mean, all of this, obviously, Dr. West has been advice, but is there anything specific that you would say to us as young communicators that are learning to find our voice and find our way? What would you say is most important for us to consider?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you could do is pick up a book on communication. Um, James McCrowski writes a book, Introduction to Rhetorical Communication. It's a secondary source where he's deriving his writings from Augustine and Isocrates primarily. He doesn't cite them much, but you know that's who he's leaning on. It's not a book that you just kind of read through. It's on rhetorical communication, but you pick up when you're reading it, man, this sounds like a homiletical book. So it's rigorous, you know, at points it's rigorous. But the way that you read it, you just read, I would set aside 30 minutes at a time to read it. It's not a big book, but it's an introduction. And I think the more that you understand about what you're doing, then you'll find your voice in preaching. You know, I mean, preaching is, you know, well, Aristotle talks about communication or rhetoric as the art of persuasion. And so it helps you find, I believe that there's anything that will help you find that is to read the rhetors. I'm not saying that you got to be a rhetorician that go out and buy all their books. I would just read one, you know. And I mean, and if you don't read McCrowski, then and I'll put him number 2. Is
Okay.
get number 1, get Aristotle's book on rhetoric. You know, it's made up of 4 books, and I mean brief books, all in one book. And the last book, as he refers to it, is the one that deals with development and delivery. And so it sounds just like you would be reading a homiletic textbook. And you say, well, why would you recommend Aristotle? Because there's something different in reading the primary text over against secondary text.
Yes. Yes.
You know? So it would just be a great book to have. And if you do it, it will enrich your life in ways that's unimaginable. I mean, it's been around for all them years. I think it's a reason why Aristotle is still being read, you know. Yeah.
I agree.
And if you haven't read it, you know, then I would say reread it, you know. And if you say, oh, I've already read it, go back and read books.
Read them again.
Start talking about that. Yeah.
How long is it taking you now from being a young preacher? I know you started at 16 preaching, if I remember correctly. How long was it taking you when you first started to prepare, and how long is it taking you now to prepare for the sermon?
I don't put a clock down anymore, Lisa, and to those that's answering it. But I probably still spend at least 15 hours in sermon preparation. I remember I used to be so proud of myself. I would tell people, you know, 25, 30 hours. You probably have to do it that much time when you first get started. But after you've been preaching for a while, you study so that you can, as we were talking about today, you study in a way that you have long-term resources.
Mm-hmm.
But you also write sermons so that you say, oh, I didn't preach this passage, but I did preach from this chapter. You go back and normally you can say, oh, I see what was going on around, you know. So preparation time, let's say 15 hours.
Okay. Okay. And Bob, you wanted to know the name of that author. That was James McCrowski. Take a look at the chat, and somebody's already put it in the chat, so that you can get that reference there. And I think there's only one more question left that somebody had. I'm just looking real quickly. Oh, I thought there was one more. I think that's it, Dr. West. I think I did catch everything.
Wow.
And I just want to ask you if there was anything else that you would offer us as young students one more time. And then
Well,
we can pray for you and let you go.
the one thing that I would recommend is that you take full advantage of your studies now. Uh, when you don't feel like reading it, when you don't feel like writing a paper, when you're not up to grab your coffee, tea, or whatever, and when you're weary, just say, no, I'm going to master this material. And I promise you, 10 years from today,
Hmm.
you will say, I am so glad that I did not overlook that section, because in ministry, you'll find yourself having to go back and back and back. So take serious study. Here's another thing I would strongly recommend. Take good notes. When you read a book, don't just underline it. Take good notes. And if somebody who's listening and you know the principles of note taking, then you take it upon yourself to help your colleagues and show them what good note taking is. It will save you a lifetime of work if you can take good notes. Take full advantage of every class that you're in, even the one that you don't want to be bothered with. Say, but when you get into those scriptures and ethics and theology stuff, get it all. Anything you don't understand, you start asking 100 questions about until you drill deep into that and you own it. Because you will need it in this ministry you're in. You will. You will. So do that. That would be that. And great notes. Great notes. Read a book. Take great notes. You know, write notes where you're answering questions. You know, how would you use this? What is the difference? Like the questions you're asking me right now, those are the questions that you start taking with your notes. You know, how do you use story in sermon? You know, when is too much story, not enough story, elements of story, things like that. I'm gonna say it 10 years from now, you'll say some of the best advice I ever got from that. And then if preaching is what you do, listen to great preaching. Not just good preaching, great preaching. And it won't take you long to start determining what's the difference between good and great. You know, you'll pick it up and say, that's preaching that. It may not be the flashiest preaching, but listen to good preaching. Because one of the ways that you learn to preach is listening to good preaching.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's good.
if you listen to good preaching, it rubs off on you. It rubs off on you. When you're writing, it rubs off on you. When you're thinking through a sermon, you begin to think, you know, in ways to say, you know, oh, how do I introduce this sermon? How do I move from introduction to the body of this sermon? How do I state my points in this sermon? And work at it, you know, work at it. You're going to feel odd about it at first, awkward and all of that. Keep on doing it. And then it becomes natural. You know, if you use a manuscript and you say, I'm just a manuscript person, try to use that manuscript in a way where you can glance at it and just keep on moving. You see, if you're saying I'm trying to move from manuscript, then you sit down and say, show me how to write notes in a way. And of course, that's where Aristotle's rhetoric becomes so important, because he covers everything that is imaginable about how to stand up and argue your case before the Senate, you know. So take all of that and keep on going, you know, keep going. Yeah.
So I think, and you brought me back to the question that I thought I saw. Do you have a way in which you organize your your notes, so your stories and all of your biographical references? Do you have a way in which you have found that is good for you to organize all those things so that you can get to them?
Absolutely not. I am a very organized person. I I got stories and sermons thrown all over the place. I that might be a job I need to get one of you to come work for me to do as my homiletical assistant, and say my job is to listen to every sermon and write down quotes and stories and store them away. Now, every year I start saying I'm going to do this, and I haven't got to it. So one lesson you can learn from listening to me said, do not do it. While you collecting them, do it. And that's what you do. You just put stories on us. You know how to go in these computers and do that.
Mhm.
Stories, biographies,
Mm-hmm.
nations, natural science, all that kind of stuff. And write them where you can get to them.
That's
This is
it.
on grace. This is on faithfulness. This is on loyalty. This is on sovereignty. This is on God. This is on spirit, all that kind of stuff. Do all that.
I love that.
It's too late for me. It's over.
It's never too late.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that.
You you're gonna glean from these students as you teach these courses. They're gonna have you up and running.
Oh yeah, now I was talking too late for me to go do these folders. I don't feel like listening to all them sermons. If I find one of them, I think sharp, I may tell them that, say, you want a job? I want you to listen to every sermon.
Every sermon.
You write down and say, this is your illustration on this. Yeah.
You might have some takers right here. I'll send you some notes later.
I tell you what, I got a job for it. I got a job.
Do you write, Dr. West, do you write in your books? Because you said for us, don't just underline and highlight, but really take copious notes. Do you write in your books?
I write in. Yeah.
Okay.
I own them. I get in there and start writing everything. And then what I'll do is go back and start, normally I just give them to my assistant and she'll go in and type the notes out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't have to go back and reread the whole book,
Yes, yes. Well, Dr. West, I had no idea what I was asking you for when I asked, but I sure am glad I asked.
Well, I tell you
We
what,
are blessed.
yeah, well, you talk about preaching. You'll never catch me on a bad day where I don't want to talk about that. Yeah.
Well, you have immensely blessed us.
I'll go and rehearse everything we talked about, and I'll start rebuilding and answering most of those questions. If you got the questions, you can send them to me.
I'll take care of this and send it to you.
Yeah, and that'll give me a chance to sit down and rethink them and answer those questions. Really, really sit and give some thought to them.
I'll do it for you. I have them. Well, I don't see any more questions. I see a lot of thank yous, a lot of God bless yous, and a lot of amens. So we are richly blessed, and I thank you. Can we pray for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I know we can't join hands, but in the spirit, let's just join hands and wrap our arms around this great gift that God has given us. So let's look to God. Father, we are immensely blessed that you would have found favor on us, God. We, your servants of God, that just want to do your will, that you would have found space for us, curated and crafted a space for us, that we could sit with such great wisdom, Father, and that we could glean and we could learn, Father, how to do what you've asked us to do well. How to not only, Father, present the word, but to marry the word and the spirit together, God, that these dry bones within us, Father, might live first, God, and that we might be able to hope somebody out there that their dry bones might come back to life and they might move, Father, and be found, Father, doing all that you've asked them to do. Now, God, we just thank you for Dr. West. God, we thank you for his ministry. We thank you for all the staff that so diligently work to make sure that he is prepared to go out in front of people every week and give this great gift that you've given him. We thank you, Lord, for his family. We thank you for, Lord, for all that you're going to do for him at Baylor University. We thank you for the books that are coming out of him still. We thank you for the word that will go forth. And we thank you for the many, 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 many generations forward that he will bless, Father, and that in his stead, the church might be even more powerful and mighty and learn how to preach the word with power and with might. We thank you, Lord, and we bless you. We thank you for this gift that you've given us today. In Jesus' mighty name.